What's up everyone, I'm Eldritch, and I finally am sitting down to do my addendum on the Warspite review that I did. I have to admit, I kind of dodged around this. I mean, I legitimately did not want to add it to the other addendum video because it would have put that video in the high 20 minutes to 30 minutes category, and I would have had to add all kinds of jump points for people to navigate around the video. And so I didn't want to do that and thought it was just much better to have a separate video for the Warspite. But I have to say, I wasn't looking forward to this video because, believe it or not, I really don't enjoy making these negative videos. I would much rather say, hey, the Warspite is awesome, woo, let's all have fun and play it, and yay, it's so great. But instead I have to do this, and I'm just going to get a lot of people saying, oh, but it's really not that bad, and you just don't know how to play it. And while that may be true, it doesn't change the facts. So first we're going to go through the patch notes and see how the documented changes have impacted the Warspite. The first documented change was now plating and construction steel are also treated as armor for the purpose of shell ballistic calculation. Now this is great, and this works for all ships, allegedly. The problem is we don't have any numbers on this at all. We don't know how exactly the armor is calculated, we don't know how accurate the portrayal of these values is. We don't know anything about how penetration and armor calculation and all of that ballistics stuff actually works in the game. You know, there's no video of them explaining it. There are no numbers on any of this. There's no 3D models for looking at the armor. All of this stuff is just being held a secret because, honestly, I have no idea why they wouldn't just give us those numbers. It would make for a much better beta test if we actually had solid, hard numbers that we could talk about, but apparently that's not what they want. And so I find it very weird to talk about this at all, because, you know, what are you gonna argue? You can say, oh, but the armor is great now, and it really works. And if you angle your ship, you're gonna get a lot of bounces. And like, none of this is a factual argument. It's all just, oh, but this one time I turned my ship and a guy shot at me and it bounced. How do you quantify that? How do you make that into an argument? Because it's just subjective blabbering. And then of course there's the other problem that the HE change happened. HE ammunition does so much damage now that pretty much anything that isn't a battleship just fires HE by default. I mean, if you're in a top tier cruiser, you can think about firing AP at other cruisers and maybe even a battleship at times when you like have them actually straight side on. But most of the time you're just going to use HE ammunition. And when a battleship is sort of coming at you, giving you only an angled armor, then even a battleship is going to load high explosive, because what's the point? It's just going to bounce, right? Or at least the chance of getting a penetration is so much lower. And because the target is so much smaller, it's much easier to just lob high explosive at their superstructures. And so because high explosive has become so incredibly effective, this armor change is practically irrelevant. And so whether or not the Warspite has the best armor at tier 7, if it really does, it really doesn't appear to matter all that much. And I've also not noticed any difference in how torpedo damage is calculated on the Warspite. You still get hit for 18,000 damage by these Japanese 610mm torpedoes. And that really isn't all that different to what it was before the patch. The next documented change was both reloading and action time of damage control party has been increased for battleships. This, however, has only half affected the Warspite because the action time was 15 seconds before the patch and is still 15 seconds. The reload time for the damage control action actually has improved, not increased. Increased when talking about reload kind of implies that the reload is longer, i.e. a nerf, but it's actually a buff, so the reload time was reduced and is now 2 minutes instead of previous 3 minutes for the Warspite. A change that benefits all battleships equally, so not something that raises the Warspite above the pack, but it's still a very nice change that the Warspite definitely benefits from. The next change was Warspite Tier 6 British Premium Battleship now features improved accuracy of secondary battery and main battery accuracy at short range. So of course we have no numbers whatsoever on the accuracy of the secondary batteries. I'll just believe them that it's a buff in some way, but how this relates to other battleships and if it's now better than the Fuso or better than the New Mexico, I don't know. Nobody knows, there's no numbers on it, it's all stupid speculation and oh yeah, it looks a lot more accurate and feels a lot more accurate. I don't care. If this change wasn't in the patch notes, nobody would even talk about it because there's no numbers, you can't actually find it out without them telling you. And so I'm not going to talk about it. But let's look at the second part of this point. Now features improved accuracy of secondary batteries and main battery accuracy at short range. What does that even mean? So I guess you're telling me that main battery accuracy at short range has increased. But can you please tell me how that's relevant? Because if you're increasing accuracy at short range, you are also increasing accuracy at long range. The accuracy is just based on degrees. And if you lower the degree by which it deviates, i.e. increasing the accuracy, which will increase the accuracy at short range, you are also going to increase the accuracy at long range. Now, even if they have built in some kind of mechanic that if you, instead of aiming at 16 kilometers, you aim at 8 kilometers, that it somehow then changes the accuracy coefficient, which is possible even though it's completely stupid, then what exactly does short range mean? Is it just below half range? Or is it below a quarter range? Or below a third range? Or below 600 meters? What is the short range? And that's the problem that I have with this. People are going on about, ooh, it's so much more accurate now at short range, but nobody actually knows what that means. It's a completely empty phrase that means nothing whatsoever. Now, what we can talk about is the in-game stats, because the maximum dispersion has decreased from 226 meters to 219 meters. That does mean that the guns have become more accurate, because it means that the maximum degree by which a shell can deviate from the aiming point has decreased by a few milli-degrees, and by that, over 16 kilometers range, it's now going to deviate a maximum of 7 meters less. Now that's great, but if you just take this value, it's going to mean that at a short range, it's going to deviate maybe 3 or 4 meters less. It's really not that much, and if that is this change, fine. It could of course be that if you aim at a nearer target, they use a different coefficient, blah blah blah, but we don't know that, they didn't release those numbers, they didn't specify, it's vague nonsense. And so the only thing I can factually go on is the 7 meter decrease in maximum dispersion, which does mean that the accuracy improved slightly. Which actually does put it ahead of the Fuso now, because at 16 kilometers range, the Fuso has a maximum dispersion of 232 meters. So it is now 13 meters better on the Warspite, and that is pretty significant. And it is also slightly more accurate than the New Mexico, which at 16 kilometers would have a maximum dispersion of about 225. Is this incredibly fantastic? Nope. Is everyone making a big deal about it? Oh yes, you betcha. These next two kind of cracked me up a little bit, I gotta say. The first one was written as part of the previous bit about the Warspite's accuracy, it just mentioned at the end, and the second one was its own point. She also has higher efficiency of the repair party consumable, and changed the efficiency of Warspite's repair crew. It is now 10% more effective compared to 0.3.0. Well, we have a saying in Germany that goes, doppelt gemoppelt hält besser, which roughly translates to twice the redundancy is better. Anyway, after the Warspite had released, there was a thread on the forums that where basically people were talking about how the Warspite's damaged repair crew was less efficient than the Fuso's repair crew and that it restored less hit points. Everyone pretty much agreed that yes, it does in fact restore less health points and something needs to be done about this, and here we go. Now something has been done about this. So now the Warspite's repair skill does 10% more, which brings it in line with the Fuso and the New Mexico. Yay! Right, and now we come to the undocumented changes. Now we know that HE ammunition has been buffed across the board and AP ammunition has been nerfed across the board. However, the Warspite is the only ship in the game that had its HE ammunition nerfed as well as its AP ammunition. Yes, that is right. All ammunition on the Warspite now does less damage, even the HE ammunition. The HE damage went from 6,060 to 5,300. A nerf of 760 points, and the AP ammunition went from 12,590 to 11,400. Now I'll put all the numbers up so you can compare, but basically it means that the Warspite now is somewhat in the middle in terms of HE damage between the Fuso and the New Mexico, with the Fuso doing more because all the Japanese HE ammunition does more damage, and with the New Mexico's ammunition doing less because all the Americans do less HE damage than the Japanese. And so the Warspite with 5,300 is sort of in the middle of this, which doesn't make her HE ammunition bad, but it certainly makes her HE ammunition worse than it was before the patch. But despite all the nerfs, she still has the best AP ammunition of tier 6, but remember that the Warspite also has a much larger caliber than the Fuso and the New Mexico. so it kind of should do more damage if you think about it. Also remember that both the Fuso and the New Mexico have 12 guns versus the Warspite's 8 guns. This does still make a very big difference. The Fuso and the New Mexico will absolutely outdamage the Warspite over time because they just have more guns. The chance of fire on the Warspite's HE ammunition has been changed from 35% to 34%. And all I can really say about that is meh. And lastly, we have an undocumented buff to the rudder shift time, going from 20.0 seconds to 18.5 seconds. The problem with this is that except for the Zao, Yamato and Warspite, every ship that isn't a destroyer has had its turning circle buffed, and a lot of them have also had their rudder shift times buffed, one of them being the Fuso. And so these are the new mobility stats of the tier 6 battleships. Now the Warspite is by no means bad in this category, but you have to understand that before the introduction of the American battleships and before the buffs to the mobility, the Warspite was insanely mobile. It was one of the main points I made in my review, that this crazy mobility is great for dodging torpedoes. At the time I thought it was supposed to be a strength for the British battleships or even just the Warspite. But no, apparently they just already knew they were going to do this and already did it for the Warspite. Or maybe the Warspite was a test run to see how that would work. And so now the Warspite still isn't the fastest ship at tier 6, does still turn better than the Fuso at a mere 110 meters, but it turns less well than the New Mexico at 540 meters, and it has the slowest rudder shift time because the Fuso was buffed from 20 point whatever it was to 17.9. One of the points I gave to the Warspite during scoring was for its amazing mobility. Now that mobility isn't amazing anymore, it's just mundane. Even the Fuso can keep up with the Warspite now. How sad is that? So no, I'm not giving that point to the Warspite anymore because it doesn't have excellent mobility anymore. Its mobility is merely average, leaving us at a new score of 1 to 4. Now you could of course argue it had its secondary battery accuracy increased, and that's somehow fantastic. But again, we don't have numbers on this. How do you quantify something like that? How do you quantify something you do not know the specifics of? You could say, oh yeah, they're more accurate than they used to be, but we don't know how accurate they were in comparison to the Fuso before the patch, and we don't know how it is in comparison to the Fuso now. The armor, again, is better on every battleship, but if you're side-on to a battleship, you still knock straight through the armor, and if you're not side-on, you just switch to HE ammunition. And if you face cruisers and destroyers, they fire HE ammunition at you anyway, so it doesn't matter. So in conclusion, I actually think the Warspite is worse than it was before the patch, simply by omission. It didn't get its mobility buffed, while the Fuso did, and the New Mexico is just inherently mobile. Given it's not as fast as the Warspite, and loses out in range, but it still doesn't even come close to the Fuso. And if she ever gets into a gunnery duel with the New Mexico, she also loses because the New Mexico has 12 guns. I still feel the Warspite should get a few more nerfs and be dropped down to tier 5. I don't think it can compete at tier 6 simply because it only has 8 guns. Now when we're talking about a ship like the Yubari, you can of course say, oh, the torpedoes are great, the mobility is great, blah 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 blah, I can do all this other stuff because it's kind of like a destroyer, but a battleship is a battleship, and a battleship needs decent guns. If it doesn't have good guns, you get shitty nonsense like the Kawachi and the Miyogi, and it should now be very obvious how bad those two ships really are, now that you can compare them to the South Carolina and the Wyoming. If you're looking for a good premium ship to farm credits on, I would still not take the Warspite. I would still go for the Atlanta or the Murmansk. If your premium ship has to be a battleship, I would seriously wait for the Itsukushi and see if that's better. If you enjoyed this round, please consider liking and subscribing. And if you have any feedback, leave it in the comments. If you have any replays for World of Warships or World of Tanks that you would like me to commentate, send them to cloakingdonkey@hotmail.com. If all goes well, you get the Sims review on Saturday. But until then, I've been Eldritch, Master Donkey, and I'll see you in another video.